Fabriano friends from all over the world. Welcome to my studio. My name is Sandrine Maugy. I am a French botanical artist living in the UK. Fabriano Artistico has been my watercolor paper of choice for some years, and I'm so happy to be making these videos for Fabriano. In the first one, we are going to paint these little beauties, and I'm going to show you every step to paint them wet in watercolor, how to layer the washes to get the depth of color, and then how to finish with some dry brush details. Are you ready? Let's go! Let's start with materials. I have my Fabriano cartridge paper, 200 grams, a pencil, a rubber, my paint box, some brushes, and some flowers. Let's have a look at the colors I am going to use. I'm going to need 2 yellows, Hansa Yellow Light and Hansa Yellow Deep. I'm going to need 2 colors to mix my purple. That's Tallow Blue Red Shade and Quinacridone Lilac. And to make the purple very dark, I'm going to add Perylene Violet. For the stem, I am going to mix Hansa Yellow Light and Tallow Blue Red Shade. And this is the purple mix of Tallow Blue Red Shade and Quinacridone Lilac. And for the shadows, I'm going to use a method I created called harmonic shadows. And that is mixing 3 primary colors that are already in the painting to mix a gray to paint my shadows with. And that's Hansa Yellow Light, Tallow Blue Red Shade, and Quinacridone Lilac. And that's all I need for the colors. Hansa Yellow Light, Hansa Yellow Deep, Tallow Blue Red Shade, Quinacridone Lilac, and Perylene Violet. I have my drawing ready on Fabriano Artistico hot pressed extra white 640 grams, which is a perfect paper for my technique because it can take a lot of water. And it's really good for botanical art because it's very smooth, so it shows the details very well. And it's also very resistant, so you can lift your paints and the paper will be okay with it. So I'm painting my shadows wet in wet, first wetting the petal that I want to paint, and then going in with my shadows. They have to be quite dark because that's going to be a very dark petal. So if you want them to show through the top layers, you need to make them dark enough. And then because it's wet in wet, they tend to feather out a little in the water. So you just clean your brush, and with a clean damp brush, you can smooth the edges if they need to be smoothed, or push back the paint if it's gone a little too far. As long as your paper is wet, you can keep working. So that's my shadows on the first petal, and now I'm going to repeat this on all the other petals. Be careful that before doing any petal, you check that all the surrounding petals are dried. Otherwise, the washes are all going to meld into each other. Now the shadows are all done, we're ready for some color. The first color we're going to paint is yellow, because it's the most delicate color on the flower. And we don't want to forget it and paint some purple where the yellow should be. So we're going to paint it wet in wet again, wetting the whole petal, even on top of the shadows. And we're now using Hansa Yellow Light, very diluted, on the bottom petal before moving in to the side petals. And now we've got to wait for this to dry before we do the next color wash. Now the first wash of yellow has dried, all the Hansa Yellow Light is dried. There's a little bit more yellow we need to do. And that is here on the bottom petal. So again, I am gonna wet the whole petal just under there for the deeper yellow patch. And just let it bleed out into the water and it will paint itself. Now we are ready for some purple on the back petal. So we're going to start over here, and this is all going to be wet in wet again. And the mix this time is Quinacridone Lilac and Tallow Blue Red Shade. Going quite dark because it's a very dark petal. If I don't go dark enough, I'm gonna have to do loads of washes. Once I've done the shadows, I'm doing the outline, keeping a very neat line, adding more paint to the shadows, and then moving on to the mid-tones, and eventually with a brush that doesn't have a lot of paint on it, into the highlights. Now, because this is velvety subject, the texture is very velvety, the highlights are not completely white, they're just a paler version of the purple. So there will be some paint on the highlight, just not a lot of it. Now I'm cleaning my brush, wiping it on a piece of cloth and then just running it along the highlights to tidy up their edges a little bit. And while it's still wet, I can still add more paint. As soon as it starts drying, you have to stop adding paint, otherwise it's going to make a mess. And that's it for this wash, and when this is dry, I can do the other one in exactly the same way. The front petals are purple, like the back petals, but they are slightly bluer. So what I'm going to do in here is that I am going to start by a wash of pure blue to reflect this. Towards the top it's going to be very pale, and towards the bottom it's going to be a little bit stronger. But I'm still leaving an area of pure pale Hansa yellow light between the blue and the stronger Hansa yellow deep. Now we have one wet and wet wash over everything, but we need to do another purple wash on these three to bring them to the same intensity as the petals at the back. So we're still going to work wet and wet, and we're still going to do one petal at a time, and we're adding the purple wash on top of the blue. So although it's the same mix as the mix I used on the back petals, by transparency, with the blue underneath, it's going to look bluer. Make sure that you add enough water to your petals so that you have plenty of time to work your color in. If it's not wet enough, it's going to dry very quickly, and then the washes will be uneven. And brush in the direction of the veins to give the right texture. And I have the flower in front of me always. So that I don't lose track of where the color should be. And as long as the petal is wet, I can add more color, I can remove color. And as soon as it starts drying, we have to stop working. That's enough for this one. Now I've got to wait for these two to dry before I do the bottom one, otherwise the paint is going to run where I don't want it to. Now all the purple washes are brought up in sync with each other. I am going to add some more to the two petals at the back. When working wet and wet, and you have a very, very dark color like this, it's pretty much impossible to build enough color in one wash. So again, I'm using the mix of tallow blue, red shade, and quinacridone lilac. I'm covering the shadows not adding too much paint to the highlights and being very careful with the edges. Neat edges are very important and you want to go to the exact same line. And in the second wash, we're also going to start dropping in some peril and violet. The peril and violet is this very dark maroon purple, and it's very good for darkening this kind of petal. And I'm using it pure, dropping it in the mix which is already there. And straight away it looks a lot darker. And it also adds some nice variations in the color. And then once I've done that, I'm going to do the same with the tallow blue red shade. So my wash is still wet, so I can keep on adding color. And the tallow blue red shade and a peril and violet mixing straight on the paper. I'm going to make this very, very dark purple, luscious, velvety purple that we need for our viola. While the top petals are drying, we can move on to the stem. Still wet in wet, so wetting the stem. And then I've got my mix of tallow blue red shade and Hansa yellow light, and I'm covering the shadows and then doing a line on the other side and blending in to the body of the stem, leaving a line unpainted here for the highlight. I can add more paint to the right side, which is the opposite side to the light. My light is coming from the left, so the shadows are going to be on the right and the highlight is on the left. And that's all we need to do for the stem. Now it's time for a last wet in wet wash on the 3 petals at the front. Again, wetting the petal evenly with pure water. Even on the areas where I don't intend to add purple. And then dropping in the purple paint in the water. Paying particular attention to the edges. At this stage you want to add enough paint that you don't have to come back to it with another wet in wet wash. So you really want to add enough color. The second wash on the front petal has dried, so now I can do the other 2. Remember to fluctuate between light and dark so that the petals don't look flat. And also keeping that tidy outline that will make your painting look crisp and sharp on the outside while being soft and dreamy on the inside. Now that all the wet in wet work is done, it's time to address the center. So we're going to start with the bottom petal, and I'm going to draw a line in pencil here, as this is the zone that I don't want to cover. This will have to stay yellow. And I'm going to do the dark purple patch. So I'm going to wet everything again, including the part I don't want the purple on. And then with a small brush, I'm going with a number 1. I'm going to take my darkest purple mix and I'm going to make that dark patch. And I still need to leave that pale yellow zone in between. So if it goes too far, like mine has done, being wet and wet, that's likely to happen. You can push it back with a flat brush, just a damp flat brush, while it's wet. As long as it's wet, you can always move your paint around. It needs to be darker than that, so I'm gonna add a bit more. And I'm gonna continue adding more in the same wash until I'm confident that I have enough color. And then I'm gonna leave that to dry. While that dries, I can do that small green blob in the center. I'm just gonna paint that with a dry brush because it's just green. And behind there it's green as well, but it's darker green, so I'm gonna add some of the blue. Then again with the shadow color, I'm gonna stipple some paint to show the texture. On those white bits here. And now we're ready for some lines. So I'm going to do those in pencil first, just to make sure they're in the right place. And then I'm going to cover them with paint. But if they go in the wrong place, it's really going to show and it's going to look wrong. Right, let's start with the top ones. And you might have to go over several times to make them dark enough. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other petals. Now if you want to finish your flower off, you can add a few veins with your purple mix. Really observing your veins well. You add them on dry paper and then you just blend them in straight away with a damp, clean brush. It's really important to blend, otherwise they're going to show too much. Don't overdo it on the veins because you don't want to hide all the beautiful wet in wet washes that you've done before that. And this is all done, we have our viola finished. Thank you for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it. There's loads more videos to see on the Fabriano site, and I will be back soon with some more tutorials for you. Happy painting, bye!